Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I would like it recorded that we do have quorum of council and that we have all council members here. And we are in the presence of our clerk's department as well as quite a number of other staff. Call this meeting to order at 1 p.m. Our land acknowledgement statement. The Township of Hamilton is situated within the traditional territory of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. Our work on these lands respectfully acknowledges their resilience and their long-lasting contributions to the area now known as the Township of Hamilton. Item 3 on our agenda. Any additions to the agenda itself? Seeing none. Confirmation of our council agenda. It's been circulated, of course, and we have a prepared motion, the agenda for the regular council meeting held on July 18th, 2023 be approved. Could I have a mover, please? Moved by Mark, seconded by John. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 6 on our agenda is public question period. I know of none. Has that changed or are we still there with?
It's declaration.
Oh, I forgot point 5. Declaration of pecuniary interest in general nature thereof. Any to be declared? Thank you. That shall be noted and recorded. We'll go back to my question period now. Anyone making a presentation today on Zoom? No, thank you. We do have some presentations and delegations today. There's a name here I'm not familiar with, and it's under 7.1 Oriole Beach Road year-round maintenance request presented by Jeremy Coons. Jeremy, you in the audience with us? Good afternoon and welcome. Please come to the podium. Thanks. And your presentation, sir, please continue.
All righty. I'd like to start off by saying hello. My name is Jeremy Coons. Thank you for affording me this time to present to you today. The other 8 full-time homeowners from Oriole Beach would have liked to be here today, but all work and couldn't afford the time off. In lieu, their letters to the town, they're not attached, but most of them have been copied on. They're mostly sent to Lucas, but I can copy you all on all of them. Pretty much everybody except for the one guy who's not articulate have sent emails expressing exactly what I'm talking about today. Fun facts about Oriole Beach. Total value from MPAC, roughly $15.5 million. If you use Hamilton Township's levy percentages, somewhere in around $180,000 a year coming into Hamilton Township for services. We don't receive the same service. 8 of the 48 residences now live down Oriole Beach 12 months of the year. 2 of these live on the municipally assumed north-south paved portion of Oriole Beach Road that is has a sign at the top that says summer maintenance only. So if you read the definition of LSR in your bylaw, they do not fit the definition as it is for residences on a private road or navigable waterway, of which they are neither. No one from the town has been able to tell me how the sign and designation came to be, but I can test it's 2023 that we chat about, by whatever means necessary, changing the bylaw or whatever has to happen. Definition needs to be changed to a real road street and be maintained year round. Sure. Oh, sir. No problem. My fiddling. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. I managed to meet and discuss last year with 42 of 48 residents through the summer of 2022, and all were indeed interested in having year-round maintenance. You guys were all sent the petition that I had them all sign, but I didn't know about the privacy initial that should have been on there, so it couldn't be officially put on the record today. Many of these residents' homes are also four season, but due to access, do not use it in the winter months, but express they would, knowing it was being maintained. There's further others completing builds and also planning to retire up here. So this is only going to continue to grow as a need. There's also another 6 or so residents that do use their homes 12 months of the year on weekends. Emily also copied you guys I was using the overall your roads map, and it's got dotted line of summer maintenance roads. So I took my Grand Cherokee and I drove them all. And basically this is my road that says summer maintenance only. All the other roads, they're like goat trails, ATV trails. They're not a road. They don't say summer maintenance. They say unassumed dangerous road, use at your own risk. So the only, like Donaldson, if you go east or west from Beaver Meadow, it's Donaldson by where the municipal thing is. That's a snowmobile trail. It says summer maintenance on the map. Varying degrees. Johnstone Road is the only one even close to definition of a road, and I'd call it a logging road. The only other road I could find that actually had a summer maintenance sign on it was Sully Road, north of Rice Lake Scenic Drive. It's a gravel 1-lane service road driveway to rental cottages. These pictured trails all had dangerous unassumed road signs. The few pictures of maintained roads are the precursor to the unassumed roads and have 1 to 2 houses down them, and that's being plowed. And it's a gravel road. And Oriole Beach is a 5.5, 6 meter paved road. At one time, no one lived down at Oriole Beach Road, so there wasn't a need for winter maintenance. But like anything, things change, need to be reassessed. I, along with the strong majority of residents of Oriole Beach Road, asked the township to do whatever is required to change the designation of Oriole Beach to year-round maintenance, whether that be a change to the bylaw or whatever. I don't know what the route is, but whatever you need to do. Please carefully review all the materials I've gathered and make a quick resolution to this matter to give the roads department time to assess their new need to plowing and salting for the 23-24 winter season. It is my understanding that the road is assumed as a summer maintenance only road. I'm here to ask how this can be changed to a public road and have the road maintained year round. The north-south paved portion is the portion in question. We're all aware that east-west is a private road with right-of-ways going through each property. It wouldn't ever be plowed by the township. Historically, the homes down this road were only used in the warmer months. As time passes, more and more of these homes have been upgraded to be year-round 4-season residences. There are 2 more being done right now, and there currently is 8 households that live 4-season. We have the need to get propane trucks, sewage pumping trucks down. The garbage is now picked up by the county in front of all of our houses year round. They go down the private road, pick everybody's garbage up. We got all the delivery companies come down there 12 months a year, and telecom, FedEx, UPS. Comes down to a safety issue, right? Regardless of the little summer maintenance sign at the top of the hill, these companies are up and down daily, year round servicing. The residents have gotten stuck many times and the road hadn't been plowed. I spent all summer of 22 going to each and every owner, total of 48 properties, large tax base, and I've missed a few, but I'd say I have 95% support on this, as the petition shows. The fact remains, we pay a large sum of levies to the township and request the changes to be made for the safety of the residents and those visiting by the road being plowed and sanded. The end.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. Any questions from council members at this point in time? I have one. Just a little clarity. Did I hear you correctly when you said that there is garbage pickup to both east and west sections at the lake year round?
Yes.
And that is completely new information to me. I surprised at that. I'm probably not the only one that's new information.
There's people that aren't aren't necessarily living there 7 days a week, that they still keep the heat on, right? So there's propane, septic pump out, there's, it's busy.
I hear you. I believe that we have a motion on this to receive your presentation.
Mhm.
But I wonder if we should not modify that ever so slightly and have the motion include that it's deferred to staff for consideration and a report coming back. I look to our clerk. Is that something that we can do on the fly here?
The motion hasn't been moved or seconded, so you can, another member of council can make a motion and it can be moved and seconded and voted on.
Okay, that's my knee-jerk thoughts. I'll turn to council members. For a motion, please. We have in front of us that the presentation made by Mr. Coons, resident, regarding Oriole Beach Road year-round maintenance request be received. And I'm suggesting maybe we defer that to staff if the mover and the seconder is such. I'll move that. With that slight modification. Do we have a seconder? Okay, moved by Mark, seconded by John. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion? Thank you, Mr. Coons, and that motion is passed to get a
So-
report back from
So
staff.
just to clarify, so that means that it's gonna go to the roads department, to the,
To the staff of the
Okay.
roads department for consideration and report back.
all right, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Richard. Please. Our
Good afternoon.
audited financial statements for 2022. And I have to, Richard. As you know.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to see you. Yes, I am here to present the draft audited financial statements. And although there are 3 documents on the agenda, I will only go through the first one. And of course, I could talk on this for about an hour, but I was informed just to keep it short. So I will try to do that to the best of my ability. So yes. So the PowerPoint presentation does provide a much more simplified view of the financial results, and as well too, the PSAB financial statements are quite involved and difficult for a lot of people to understand, including some accountants as well. So hopefully then this will provide you some greater insight. But first off, I guess I'm supposed to work this, aren't I? Is the auditor's report on the financial statement. So this is our report. The report is consistent with prior years. It's a 2-page auditor's report, and the second paragraph is the important paragraph that, in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Township of Hamilton at December 31st, 2022, and the results of its operations and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So that is your standard clean unqualified auditor's report. When it says consolidated, it does include the operations of the township as well as the municipal animal services until that operation was transferred. And then as well too, it's in accordance with public sector accounting standards, more commonly known as PSAB, which is a different accounting standards than how you budget. So I'll try to highlight a few of those differences as we move through. But next, just give you an idea of some of the audit procedures that we do complete throughout the audit, so that these are the ways that we gather our audit evidence to produce our auditor's report. So we do a lot of review and sampling and finding backup documentation for the transactions and looking at both the inflows, revenues, and how money goes out, being disbursements and payroll, and then journal entries, how things get adjusted. Overall, the audit is complete pending council approval of the financial statements, receipt of the signed representation letter, and receipt of the legal letter. Overall, there were no difficulties encountered during the audit, and overall that there were no unadjusted differences. So your schedule is clean. So that's good. So that's a summary of where the audit is at. And now we will just take a quick tour of the numbers. So So under PSAB, you have financial assets. So these are assets that are either cash or will be turned into cash. And you have four main categories there, being cash and investments being your largest one. And those two combined did go up year over year for about 650,000. A portion of that is all just related to changes in your other receivables payables, plus as well, your reserves did increase. So that explains the difference there. Your receivables were up. So those are the people that owe you money. A majority of that is just related to HST rebate being higher, as well as some insurance proceeds that were outstanding at the end of the year. And then as well too, your taxes receivable. So these are the amounts that the ratepayers owe the municipality, went up slightly from the year before. Overall, though, as a percentage of the total levy, including interest, it's 6.4% this year, up from 6.1%, but still well below the 10% low risk range set by the province. So you're still doing very well there. So that's good. And I guess maybe I forgot to say at the start, when we started looking at the numbers, that there are two main things you will see that impact the statements. I guess with the transfer of who is providing the municipal animal services, that created a number of variances when we look a little later on, and as well too, of course, to the issue with the fire that created in the roads department, that created additional costs and requiring new assets as well. So those do impact the year-end results. The following slide then just provides the 5-year history of the net financial assets. Next, we come to your financial liabilities. So these are the amounts that you owe to others. And as I said earlier, with the transfer of services for the municipal animal services, has created just some amounts owing to other organizations and the transferee at the end of the year. So that caused your payables to go up by the largest amount. As well too, there were some holdbacks payable for some construction projects, as well as accruals and regular items associated with that. And then as well too, your deferred revenue obligatory reserve funds. So that represents money you've received for gas tax, development charges, and parkland. Canada Community Building Fund, no longer gas tax. And then so those are the monies you've received, but you haven't spent yet. So ideally, though, they will be recognized as revenue when you do spend them. And then as well too, your deferred revenue represents monies you've received mainly for OCIF that hasn't been spent yet. And then the next slide just gives you a 5-year history of that. Then we come to your non-financial assets. So these are assets that you do not try to turn into cash normally. Of course, with some of your two major differences this year, some of them did get turned into cash and moved around. But still, tangible capital assets are your largest component, as well as you have some prepaid expenses and inventories, mainly related to your insurance premium that goes into the following into 2023, and then as well to roads, materials, salt and sand being your inventory amounts, then leaving you a balance of about $55 million in your accumulated surplus. And then next we come to the consolidated statement of operations. So this then presents your revenues and expenses on a PSAB basis on the top part of the slide there. And this you can see there in the budget column, you were budgeting for a deficit under PSAB, but then if you take a look at the items under the reconciliation line, so those are the items that then bring you back to showing that overall there was a nil balance at the bottom, which is what you're needing to see for setting your tax rate budget. And then as well too, for both the actuals for 2022 and 2023, they do come to zero as well, with changes in your operating surpluses. So items such as assets, amortization, transfers to and from reserve, things such as that gain or loss on sale of assets do not form part of PSAB revenue and expenses, but they are for your tax rate purposes. So then overall, you can see there, the one thing that does highlight here is your budgeted purchase of capital assets was almost 3.9 million, the second line there in the middle of the page versus 3.1 at the actual, so there's a variance there that'll be highlighted as we move through. Next, we can see here the your accumulated surplus versus your tangible capital assets. So really the one thing to point out here is that you always want the orange bar to be higher than the blue bar, which means you have more equity than what you have tied up in your land and buildings, so that you do have some reserves so that you can utilize those moving forward. Your next slide just gives you an idea of your total revenue and expenses and annual surplus over the last 5 years, and you can see there you do run pretty close to the line, which as is expected, since you're not supposed to be always generating a profit or an annual surplus, and that will vary based on capital. Next, we come to just a summary of the actual revenues and expenses for the year. And you will see here that the actual in 2022 was higher than the budget. A couple of things to highlight here. Of course, the gain on the disposal of your tangible capital assets, there was a zero amount budgeted on the very last line in the revenues, but it came in at 404,000. Yet again, those two major items I talked about earlier, the transfer of services and the and of course the fire created most of that gain on disposal of assets there. So and then as well too, you can see you utilized about 583,000 in Canada Community Building Fund or gas tax for roads projects throughout the year. So that was put to use there for five specific capital road projects. As well, you utilize development charges for both in the roads and the fire and water services. So those are the some of the major capital revenues. And I guess the one thing to point out too with the transfer of services for the municipal animal services, the municipal grants you can see there is down a fair bit from prior year and budget. That's because of course you only had received monies from the participants for part of the year. So then the following slide gives you the pie chart of your revenues, and with property taxation being the largest. And now we take a look at where your money went to on a PSAP basis. Overall, within protection services, you'll notice a large variance to budget, and that's also related to the disposal of the animal services and the transfer of that to the other organization, as well too in transportation services. Increasing costs for fuel really impacted you, as well as some additional costs related to replacement of items related to the fire. And then as well, I think recreational services coming back more so to budget after things were opened up again. Still in total, revenue expenses were higher than budget, but those items can be explained. And then the following slide gives you the pie chart on that. Next, we look at the type of expenses, and you can see there the largest variance being in the external transfer line. So those are the amounts either transferred to your fellow participating municipalities for the animal services, as well as the organization that took that over. And then as well too, materials and supplies were slightly over related to some additional fuel costs and insurance costs. And next we come to the pie chart on your expenses. And then moving along to the accumulated surplus. So this is the important slide out of the deck. Overall, it gives you a breakdown of what makes up your almost $55.3 million in accumulated surplus. And as you can see there on the top part, the surplus deficit component there, the majority of your equity is tied up in your tangible capital assets, 47 million. You can see there that the waterworks operations are still in a deficit position, but improved from the prior year. And then overall too, the township did have an increase of about 80,000 within their surplus level, whereas of course too with the transfer of services for the animal control, that's animal services, then that is no longer there. And then so that $47.4 million of your accumulated surplus is tied up into those items. So it's the reserves down below the 7.8 that you can utilize moving forward. So that's funds you have set aside that as I said, you can use to complete your capital project. So ideally that you can replenish your capital, do that on a consistent basis, as well as combine that with the use of your asset management plan and your other sources of revenue being development charges and Canada Community Building Fund. And then so ideally that your tax rate is predictable and stable moving forward. And as well too, you can see that so therefore those are the amounts that you have there. And one thing to keep in mind when you look at the tangible capital assets, they represent the cost that it costs the municipality to acquire them. So keep in mind, there's no correlation between that number and what it'll cost you to replace them. So unfortunately, they are not at the numbers that you bought them for. So, and then the following slide just shows you a 5-year continuity of your reserve and reserve funds. And then overall, you can see here where you spent your money on your capital, and the majority of that is related to roads and bridges, and as well to things like Rice Lake Drive and Menifee Road and Hamilton Road, things such as that being the largest amounts within the $1.9 million there. And then as well, the following slide just gives you an idea as to your capital additions compared to your amortization over the years. And then the next slide gives you an idea as to how much unamortized life you have in your capital assets. And these are purely based on averages. So if you acquired something more recently, it'll definitely generate a larger green part of the bar for you. And then the following slide just gives you an idea of your net financial asset trend over the years. And that's you can see there that you do remain in the black, and ideally that can continue, as well as then completing all your capital projects, so that in years where you have unique things like a fire, that you do have the available resources to keep on moving forward and not requiring any bank financing or temporary loans or anything like that. So that's the benefit of having the reserves. So even with the few unique things this year, you still remain in a good position. And we wish to thank everyone at the municipality for their assistance during the audit. They did a fine job in preparing for that. So thank you.
Do we have any questions for Richard? Larry, please.
Thanks, Richard. That's great. Nice to see the dollars going up. Did you do a comparative analysis with the other municipalities so that we have a sense of where we fit in the overall picture of how we match up with them?
No, we didn't do it this year, just during the pandemic. Of course, comparable municipalities were at different stages of when their information was available on the FIR website. So we're hoping next year then we'll be able to return to that presentation again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry. Any other questions for Richard? Thank you, Richard. You for years have been coming and giving us a positive position on the audit, and we thank you for that. We do have a prepared motion that reads that the presentation of Baker Tilly regarding the Township of Hamilton 2022 audited financial statement be received. Could I have a mover, please? Moved by Bruce, second by John. Quick follow-up. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you again, Richard. 7.3 on our agenda is a presentation on our asset management development project. And I would choose not to pronounce the name because I know I'll say it wrong.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all again. My name is Marisa Benuelos, and I am an asset management advisor with PSD Citywide. Today, I'm going to be providing you with a closeout summary of the asset management plan or asset management development project that we worked with the Township of Hamilton on. Just next slide, please. In terms of the agenda, today we'll be discussing the project and addressing kind of 3 key questions. So the first is, what did we do? So what were the goals of the project? What was the overview and what was the timelines? The next is, what did we find? So we'll summarize those findings for you. And then the third is, based on those findings, what are the recommendations? So to start off, I wanted to kind of outline what were the goals of this project. And so when we initiated the project, we worked with the township to identify some specific goals that they were looking to achieve. And so 4 were identified. One is to bring together data and information on your infrastructure to help inform a strategic and data-driven decision-making process. The second, to support that, is to facilitate interdepartmental collaboration and knowledge sharing so that we can increase the confidence in our long-term capital planning and associated asset management decision-making. The third was to identify high-level processes that would enable us to support the continued advancement and maintenance of our asset management data so that it remains current, accurate, and reliable as part of kind of a broader strategy. And the fourth was, through all of these things, to increase and the confidence in the data on the infrastructure assets to support strategic decision making. I wanted to give a little bit of an overview in terms of the project duration, who was involved, what was involved, just to give you a bit more context into the depth of review that was conducted. So this project was about a year in duration. It was kicked off in June of 2022 and finalized in June of this year. The project involved numerous engagements of staff across multiple departments. So that included staff in public works, in water, in your emergency services department, your parks and facilities department, your financial services department. And for your IT assets, we also engaged North Lumberland County as well. Through those engagements, we worked with staff and we worked with various reports and studies to review and refine, and where possible, integrate the data and information from those reports as well as from staff into your asset management program, which will better position the township to make more data-driven decisions. We also worked with staff to identify and document the current practices that you deploy to managing your infrastructure assets. So things like maintenance, inspection, and so on. And for your roads and your bridges, we developed life cycle models, which reflect various interventions like rehabilitations and replacements based on expert studies. And then we also developed risk models for all of your other assets. Through all of those activities, we were able to identify the long-term capital investment requirements and the estimated timing of those investments. So what is needed and when. And all of this information culminated into 3 report deliverables. The first being life cycle strategies, the second looking at risk, and the third at levels of service. To kind of break down that previous slide into what did we do when, this is a project timeline. So as I noted in the earlier slide, we did begin the project in June of last year. Pretty much right away, we got into the data review. So that involved us looking at the information on your assets and updating information like condition, like replacement cost, reviewing other attributes like maybe, for example, the material of a pipe, so on and so forth. Into November, we also started looking at data and information from other reports and appending it to, again, your asset management system, so that we work towards that goal of updating the information so that it's reliable. Shortly after November, we began asset management staff training. So that involved us working with some of your staff to provide information on what asset management is, the value of it, and the application of it. And then in March, as you know, we conducted council training on similar topics. Going back to the data, in January, we conducted what we call a data gap analysis. So that involves us looking at every single asset within the asset management software to review whether or not it has basic data fields like age, in-service date, condition, replacement cost, and where it doesn't, working to ensure that it does. From there, we developed reports that we'll look at today. These were developed kind of at 3 different points based on the report content. So beginning with life cycle strategies in December, then risk in March, and levels of service in April. We worked with the township to review and refine those reports and finalize them in June of this year. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good kind of background in terms of what the goals of the project were, what was involved in terms of who, the processes, and kind of the extent of data review and update and feedback like that. What I'll be doing over the next several slides is summarizing the information in the reports. So we'll start with life cycle strategies, and then we'll go through the other 2 of risk and levels of service. So beginning with life cycle strategies, here we're really looking at what interventions occur to your assets. So maintenance, what's the cost of them? How do we compare, replacing something versus rehabilitating it? The basics of who does what, when, how frequently. And when we make larger decisions, what are our considerations? So what factors do we consider when replacing an asset? How do we prioritize replacement? So we worked with the staff I noted early on in terms of the departments to look at on an asset category, just the previous slide, on an asset category basis, what the typical life cycle activities were. So we sought to understand kind of the frequency, the extent, and the persons involved. And through that, we really sought to address kind of the following key questions. So what maintenance activities are typically conducted? How frequently? By whom? Is it done kind of with your own staff, or is it contracted out? Do you do all of the assets in that category? So do you do all of the mains, or do you just do a portion of them? We also sought to understand how condition is estimated. So is it just age-based? Do we have assessed condition? Is that determined internally or externally? If it's done internally, is there a standard process for evaluating condition? We also looked at rehabilitation. So for some assets, rehabilitation is a viable alternative to replacement. And so we sought to understand for those assets, what rehabilitation activities might you conduct, and how would you determine which activities to conduct? And lastly, we sought to understand when you're making decisions with regards to asset investment, particularly replacement, how do you prioritize? So what factors are you considering? Because often you'll have to kind of prioritize from a larger list. So through those questions, as well as reviewing reports, in some cases, we were able to append specific life cycle activities to the assets to which they are recommended to occur on. And so this occurred for your roads based on your roads needs study, as well as your bridges and structural culverts based on a bridge and structural culvert study known as the OSIMS. This is a screenshot from your database just to demonstrate the actual kind of connecting those recommendations to the specific assets they apply to, and kind of connecting that to the outputs of this analysis. So you can see here various roads, the recommendation for the type of event, the date of it, the cost of it, and so on and so forth. This is at a more granular level, looking at one specific asset. So you'll see 3 black dots. The first 2 are condition assessments. So those were, in this case, third-party assessments that went out and looked at the road and gave it a condition score. One would have been conducted in roughly about 2014 and the other in 2019. And those conditions kind of changed the projected replacement date of the asset. And then the third is a recommended rehabilitation to that road. Again, this was based on your roads needs study, and it's basically forecasting the expected impact of that event to the road, which then kind of impacts the future modeled replacement date of it. So this next graph is looking at the forecasted capital requirements. So it's just looking at your capital costs, and it is reporting it for your entire portfolio. So this is extending to all of the assets within the township. It's reported out in 5-year blocks with the different colors representing different asset categories. So for example, green is representing your road network, kind of a darker brown is your bridges and culverts. Basically, this is showing the forecasted capital investment requirements over time, with the red dashed line showing the average annual requirement over time. So that's going to be the same every year since it's an average. What this information does is it helps us kind of better understand what costs we're expecting and when, how those costs might vary by asset category, and then you know, what we might need to do to facilitate that kind of investment. Now, as I said kind of earlier in my presentation, we did have a series of recommendations. So for every report, there are recommendations, and there are often several key recommendations that are either of quite a significant nature and or apply to multiple asset categories. So these are the recommendations for the life cycle strategies. In terms of your core assets, we want to ensure that any study findings and recommendations are really incorporated into our asset management system, so that we can reflect that in kind of our analysis. So through this project, as I demonstrated in the previous slides, we were able to do that, and we just recommend that's a continued practice. For your non-core assets, specifically focusing on any facility assets, we suggest considering at least procuring what we call building condition assessments. That essentially provides the township with a much more granular breakdown of your facilities that better reflects the actual lifespan of various components within the facilities and the corresponding investment requirements of those components. So we know that if a building is composed of many different components, and oftentimes the lifespan of those components will vary. So if we can start to reflect how we represent the data to mirror how the asset is in fact kind of degrading over time, it will lead to more accurate and comprehensive information and analysis. And then really across all asset categories, we suggest that when any external study, regardless of the asset that it applies to, is procured, making really clear connection to the corresponding asset ID within the system. This just better enables any of those recommendations to be appropriately linked to that asset and kind of considered in any municipal decisions. When looking at capital budgets, it's important to look at the long-term needs. So, you know, maybe not a 2-year window, but a longer 10-year window or even longer than that, that reflects what might be needed, not just in the immediate term, but kind of the mid and long term. And then lastly, to review the internal condition assessment process. So where there are internal condition assessments, ensuring that from one year to the next, there's consistent parameters, considerations, procedures that are applied and well documented to your assets. So the next item that we looked at was risk. Here we sought to identify the qualitative or the system risks that were most relevant and to identify to which asset categories they applied. We also sought to quantify and actually measure asset risk at an asset level. And we did this by evaluating what's the probability of an asset failing and what is the consequence of that asset failing, and what information do we have available to us to calculate that risk. From that, we're able to begin to measure the risk that we hold, as well as which assets and which asset categories hold that risk. So looking at qualitative risks are generally impractical to quantify, but they are definitely recognized for the threats that they pose, typically to a group of assets and to those assets' ability to provide the intended service. So we did identify by asset category which qualitative risks applied. We found across several categories, there were a few qualitative risks that were pretty consistent. And so one of those is fiscal capacity. Essentially, this means that the funds available are less than the funds needed. This is, I think, a risk I've observed in every municipality that I've worked with. It's not an uncommon risk, but it is certainly very much a risk. The second is aging infrastructure. So what this means is you have a lot of assets of a similar age, and those assets are approaching the end of their life, which means you're going to have kind of a significant investment required in a relatively short period of time. And you will likely have resource constraints, both on the financial side and often sometimes as well, even on the staffing side to support the delivery of those projects. This too is not at all an uncommon risk, particularly within Canada and particularly within the municipal sector. So to give you a bit of context to that, there is a 2019 report called the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card that was conducted based on the collection of about 1,800 municipalities and provincial agencies 2016 data. And for this data, they looked at basic information like the age of their assets, the condition of their assets. Essentially what they found is about 40% of roads as well as bridges are in fair or poor condition, so a large amount. And only about 20% of assets overall were constructed in the last 20 years. So just due to kind of when Canada developed and when there is building booms, there's certainly not at all an uncommon issue, but it is still a bit of a threat and risk that municipalities, and in this case, the township, does have. The third was organizational change and capacity. So essentially what this means is that there is kind of the risk of staff turnover, and that can pose some challenges to the continuity of operations and things like that. Now, fortunately, through asset management, we're beginning to basically take information that has historically been maybe within staff's kind of memory bank and converting it into a digitized form that is more easily referenceable and available to the township as staff change. So that's kind of a demonstration of the mitigation of that risk. But nonetheless, there is still an impact when there are staff changes, and this is a general risk to infrastructure. The next item that we looked at from a risk lens was what we call quantitative risk. So here we're looking to actually measure the amount of risk held at an asset level. And in order to do that, we consider two factors. Excuse me. The first is the probability of failure. So how likely is this asset to fail? And the second is the consequence of failure. If it does fail, what are the impacts? And so we looked at on a category, asset category level, we developed risk models. And those risk models were developed with the specific parameters relevant to that asset category. So this is an example of one of the risk models that was developed. And this is a risk model for your water mains. So here, when we look at the probability of failure, we are using asset condition as a proxy of failure. And we are weighting it at 80%, saying asset condition is has a really strong prediction on something failing. And in the case of water mains, we also know that the material of the main can impact its propensity to fail. Some materials are a little bit more durable and less inclined to fail than others. So we also include that as a parameter to the model, but it's not as heavily weighted as condition. Then when we look at consequence of failure, we're considering two types of consequences. The first is economic. So if this asset fails, what will it cost to replace it? This has the largest weighting at 70%. And then the second is a social consequence, and that is the pipe diameter. So in this case, the size of a pipe will generally dictate the extent of the number of people affected by its failure. And so that is reflected in the model. So we applied this model to the water mains. And then again, like I mentioned, we created other models for other asset categories that reflect the parameters specific to that asset failing, as well as the actual data available to us to calculate the risk. So this next slide is a screenshot from your database, just kind of want to show what that looks like within the system. So you'll see the same parameters that I referenced previously noted here alongside the same weights. And here we start to look at different condition scales, how that translates to different levels of risk, different material types, how that translates to different levels of risk alongside replacement and diameter. So this next slide is looking at kind of the results. So how much risk do we have? On your left, we have risk reported by asset category. This is the weighted average risk rating for that category of assets. And we can see there's variability. Some categories have a little bit more risk than others. That's very common. There's going to be some differences between categories. On your right, you'll see what we call kind of a heat map. So this is a matrix that's plotting the consequence on the y-axis and the probability of failure on the x-axis. Assets in red have either a high probability of failure and or a high consequence of failure. Those in orange are more of kind of a moderate risk, so some kind of combination of the two. And then green and blue are more of your low risk. What this does, it helps us kind of visualize the distribution of risk. The figures below refer to the replacement value of those assets that carry that level of risk. And this just helps us kind of begin to evaluate maybe how to treat those risks. So in terms of the recommendations from the risk reports, the first is to regularly review and consider your risk results when making investment prioritization decisions. So we know we won't be able to do all the things we want to do. So how do we evaluate what we choose to do? Risk is a good tool. It's not necessarily, the final answer, but it is a good tool to help you narrow that down. Any consideration of risk results should also consider the data confidence. So some assets may have, for example, better assess condition data than others, and therefore may produce slightly more reliable risk results. So we'll want to kind of consider what is our confidence in the data, and in some cases we may want to supplement those risk scores with some in-field expertise from your staff. The next is to identify asset information that is most valuable to risk models. In some cases, that may be information that you have, but in other cases, you may not have that information currently available to you. So you'll have to work to determine the availability of that data, the efforts needed for the collection and the maintenance of it, alongside the costs. And you'll want to kind of weigh the cost of collecting that data against the utility provided from it before evaluating kind of the decision to collect it and maintain it. Third is to regularly review the risk models to ensure that they remain relevant. So, what you consider to your risk model may change over time, whether that's because your data available changes or how you evaluate risk changes. And you'll want to review the relevance of the factors, the appropriateness of the weighting, whether or not there's any additional factors or parameters that you want to include, and the availability, accuracy, and the extent of the data that you would have to support those revisions. And then the last is to consider developing a risk management policy. This would kind of be the next step where you're looking to identify what are your principles in terms of managing risk and your objectives. What is your risk appetite? So how much risk are you willing to retain as an organization? What are some ways that you can treat risk, and what is the expected reduction in risk by that treatment? And what is your risk tolerance? So after you've treated the risk, there will be some level of residual risk that's left. What is your tolerance to that risk? Okay. So the final area of focus was on levels of service. Here we are reporting on the current level of service. So how are our assets currently performing? And we're working to begin kind of the recognition that there are trade-offs between the cost of owning an asset or investing in an asset and the risk that that asset holds alongside the performance that it delivers. Okay, so various metrics were selected by asset category. Some of those metrics are mandated by OREG. Specifically, that will be more focused on your core assets. So these are metrics that every municipality within the province must report on. And then otherwise, they are selected by the township based on metrics that are meaningful to them. Generally, these are reported out as of 2021, so they're reflecting 2021 year-end data. And while there was varied metrics selected, there was a few that were common across most asset categories. And so those were the average conditions. So what is the average condition of the assets in this category? The second is the current versus the target capital rate of investment. The target reinvestment rate looks at what is the annual capital requirement? So how much do I need to spend on my assets relative to the replacement cost of my assets? And then the actual reinvestment rate is what is the actual investment? Again, this is just looking at capital to my assets relative to the replacement cost. When we look at these investments, we are required, based on the legislation, to only consider sustainable sources of funding. So that would exclude any one-time grants from the equation. We cannot include anything that's not sustainable when we're looking at this. So if we look at what did we find, as I mentioned just in the previous slide, condition was a common parameter across all asset categories. And so this pie chart here is outlining the condition of your assets throughout your portfolio. So all of the assets that you own, and it is reporting condition weighted by a replacement cost. Generally, what we see is most of your assets are at least in fair or better condition. There are some in poor or very poor, but they have a relatively small percentage of the portfolio. we do want to note that this is based on the assets as of 2021 year end. And those assets, the condition of them will naturally change over time as as they naturally degrade or as you do projects to improve their condition. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the second metric that we looked at was what is the current versus the target reinvestment rate? So what are we investing in our assets relative to the replacement cost versus what do we need to invest in our assets? The dark, I guess that's black, boxes represent the current reinvestment rate. Again, that is based on sustainable funding, so we can't include any kind of one-time grant. And we're not including operational dollars, it's strictly capital. And the blue line is the target reinvestment rate. So as you can see, in all asset categories, there is a discrepancy between the current versus the target. In some cases, the discrepancy is more significant than others. For example, your road is pretty close, but your facilities is not very close. This table here is just kind of supplementary information to support the previous graph. So this is looking at what's the average annual capital investment required. So how much should we typically be investing in a year, comparing that to how much are we actually investing, and looking at the deficit. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some asset categories that have less of a differential than others in terms of the funding. Okay, so what are the key recommendations? So there's really 4 that came out of the levels of service. The first is to measure and review your current levels of service. It is not a requirement to do an annual reporting of your current levels of service, but it is something that we recommend so that you have kind of a retention of your historical performance and a better ability to respond to changes in performance. The second is to determine reporting responsibility and frequency and response standards to levels of service. So consider basically who is going to be doing the reporting, at what frequency, and how you're going to kind of engage with that information. And to support that, we would suggest looking at kind of how you budget and whether or not it's something you could perhaps align to your asset management categories to better support some of that analysis with your decision making. The third and fourth are related to a forthcoming requirement. So in 2025, Ontario municipalities are required to report on what's called proposed levels of service. So this is essentially the target. So where the desired level of performance is for that metric. It does require definitely some resources and advanced preparation to deliver on that. So we suggest at this point in time, looking towards resourcing that. And then kind of in connection with the third requirement is the fourth, which is after you've identified the resourcing requirements and developed a resourcing plan, to consider kind of the public consultation process for working to understand what a suitable proposed level of service might be, and working to kind of educate that trade-off of cost, risk, and performance. Okay, so just a few kind of overall conclusions. I wanted to kind of connect us back to some of the earlier slides and hopefully kind of bring this all together. So one of the first slides we looked at what were the goals of this project, and we identified 4 goals. Those really look at data and information, the ability of that information to help inform our decisions, the confidence in that information, and kind of the collaboration between various departments within the municipality. I think, with the information that we've presented today, we've demonstrated how we have worked with the township to enhance your information and how those enhancements can help us make or provide information to support some strategic decision making, whether that's looking at risk, whether that's understanding kind of what are the long-term requirements as well as performance. As well, I wanted to note a few kind of final remarks or words of encouragement. Firstly, you've probably noticed a trend that I've said data quite a bit. And so what that kind of supports is that asset management is really premised on using information and facts as much as possible to drive decisions. And data is kind of the cornerstone of doing that. And so it's really critical that data is maintained and enhanced as a regular practice. So we've done a lot of work with the township to get the data updated and as accurate as possible. But that work really has to continue going forward. And then the second is asset management is certainly an ongoing practice. It really requires engagement of staff, kind of the buy-in of staff, and the use of the information that we've collected, again, to support decision making. So in order to leverage the power of the information that we've collected, we want to use it, recognizing that sometimes we may rely on it more than others based on any data limitations that might be identified. Last but not least, I did want to thank the township for the opportunity that you gave to PSD Citywide to engage with you on this project. It is certainly not a small undertaking to do this, and we sincerely appreciate the efforts, the commitment, and the enthusiasm of the township, and particularly your staff, Nazrit and Janika, who we worked quite closely with on the project. So thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. You've shared a lot of information there. Some at the beginning with those numbers does concern me a little bit, but we might better know about it now to develop a plan to move forward. So I will go to my fellow council members here. Do we have any questions or comments on the presentation? Larry, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question. So based on all the evaluations that you've done and the work you've done to date, we now have a baseline on the data that we can use to move forward. Is that correct? In
Yeah,
other words-
so sorry, continue there.
Yeah, so we now have the architecture to move forward with. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly. So this information is stored in an asset management software tool that the township uses extensively. So it's all there. It's very much updatable and reportable.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Any other question? Mark, please. Marissa, could you hear that?
I'm sorry,
I don't know whether Mark's
no.
mic was on.
I'm sorry. I'll repeat that.
Thank you.
I'm not sure. Where do we go from here then? Do we get a staff report to say how we keep up and maintain this, our asset management plan and so forth and moving into the future? Or I'm not just sure where we, how we continue on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we are going to be using or keeping these data in mind when we are presenting the budget, especially when it comes to forecasting for capital as well as reserve requirement. So this is something that we are going to be using when we are preparing our budget presentation.
I guess, how do we keep our asset management plan up to date though? Is somebody going to be inputting that and keeping that up to date?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we are going to be working very closely with other departmental heads to update it. So finance will take on that to update the data in our citywide to ensure that we have correct information.
Any further questions then? Seeing none, I shall say thank you, Marissa, and I'll go to a prepared motion that the presentation made by Marissa of Public Sector Digest regarding the Asset Management Development Project be received. Do I have a mover? Moved by Larry, seconded by Mark. Any questions or comments at this time? All those in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you kindly.
through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe we should say that it's been a long and arduous task, I think, for staff and also the consultant. So congratulations to you on completing this project. I know it was a really tough project to work on, and thank you very much for all the work that you did.
Thank you, Larry. We're about to move into public hearings under section 8.1 on our agenda. We do have a motion that council go into public meeting under section 34 of the Planning Act and or section 357 of the Municipal Act at 2:10 p.m. on July 18th, 2023. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by John, second by Bruce. Thank you. All those in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. Sandra, I believe you have a couple of reports for us, so I'll turn the microphone over to you if you would, please. And our next item is 8.2 on our agenda regarding a zoning amendment application at 4903 County Road 45, and I would refer to it as the Old Pickering Hotel in my terms. So Sandra, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If it please council, I'll go through the process for the public meeting. The mayor will, of course, announce each application as it comes forward. And I, the planning coordinator, will provide a synopsis of the planning report, and the report is available on our website. The floor will then be open to the public. Please make yourself known to the clerk by raising your hand and you will be called upon. The order of speaking is as follows: those persons in support of the application, those persons in opposition to the application, those persons seeking clarification, and the applicant will have an opportunity to speak at the end should they desire. We note that all persons wishing to speak must address their comments and questions directly to the mayor. And before speaking, we ask that you come here to the podium, state your name and address clearly and slowly so that the clerk can ensure that the record is complete. Following public input, council may make comments or ask questions as they deem necessary. And a bylaw may be entertained at a later point during the regular meeting of council today or on a later date. The reasons for council's decision and the impact of public input will be provided by the council members. And those persons requesting a copy of notice of decision must do so in writing to myself, or you may sign the file sheet that is in the lobby. I advise that you carefully sign the correct sheet because there are two sheets there today. As the mayor has said, this is in respect of, the first meeting is in respect of 4903 County Road 45, and it's recommended that the proposed bylaw amendment be adopted, as it does appear to be in good planning, in keeping with good planning principles. The notice of public meeting was circulated to the neighboring property owners on June 26, 2023, and the signs were posted on the property on June 22, 2023, in accordance with the Planning Act. This application is seeking to rezone the subject property from Hamlet Commercial to Special Urban Residential First Density 30, recognizing the residential use of the property, the decreased lot dimensions, and the setbacks of the existing buildings from the lot lines. The proposal does appear to be in keeping with the provincial policy statement, as residential uses are definitely permitted and encouraged within settlement areas. The township official plan has also been reviewed, and it's noted that non-conforming uses such as a residential use in a commercial zone are considered to be non-conforming, and the zoning bylaw can be amended to recognize the existing use, provided that there's no negative impacts to the surrounding area. It's also noted that the subject property is within the wellhead protection area of Creighton Heights, and we have received a letter from the risk management officer at the County of Northumberland. Almost in here. Under section 59 for vulnerability to water. Anyway, based on review of the information received, there is no associated land use activity that has been identified as a significant drinking water threat. So the risk management officer is supportive of this proposal. It's the opinion of this department, the proposal is in keeping with the Baltimore area settlement area policies. With respect to the zoning bylaw, again, the property is currently zoned Hamlet Commercial, and that was recognizing the old Pickering Hotel. It's been zoned this way since at least 2001. There's evidence that the property has been used residentially, not commercially, for a great number of years. And rezoning the property to recognize the residential use would be appropriate. There is a environmentally sensitive area identified on the property due to the Baltimore Creek running down the opposite side of County Road 45. But this environmentally sensitive area will not be amended at all in the proposed zoning bylaw. It is noted that there's an existing right-of-way or easement through the property from the Gully Road to the abutting property to the north. The proposed bylaw will not affect the status of the right-of-way. It's also noted that the lands and premises known as the Pickering Hotel have been designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. And again, this zoning amendment does not affect the status of the historical designation. As the opinion of this department's proposal is in keeping with the intent of the zoning bylaw, and no new development is being proposed. Agency comments received, the number of comments have been listed here, and there were no objections to the proposal. Since authoring the report, I have received a letter from the County of Northumberland and their summary. The rezoning application proposes to legalize an existing residential use, detached dwelling on the subject property. Applicable provincial and county land use policies permit residential land uses in rural settlement areas. The county's Public Works Department and Inspection Services Division have no comments on the proposed rezoning application. Based on the foregoing, the county planning has no objection to the zoning bylaw amendment application. A bylaw has been prepared for council's consideration today. It does appear, in the opinion of this department, the proposal is in keeping with the intent of the governing documents and is appropriate for the property. If it please the committee, the council, beg your pardon, the applicant has requested I read a brief statement. Good afternoon, members of council. Today, I wish to request the rezoning of my property located at 4903 County Road 45 in Baltimore, where I have resided for the past 10 years, from its existing status of Hamlet Commercial to residential. I believe that this change is necessary to appropriately reflect the use of this property, as it has not been used commercially, to my best knowledge, for several decades. This rezoning will not change or negatively impact the surrounding environment or neighborhood in any way. This change will more easily allow me to sell my property to a party who wishes to continue its use as a single-family residential home. And that's from Michaela Zakharov. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Sandra. Just a little point of clarity in the report, if I might. Did I hear you say that the property will be zoned to UR 1-30?
Yes, when I wrote the report, I thought the specialized zone number would be 28, but when I double checked all my resources and actually wrote the bylaw, 28 and 29 have already been used, so we're up to 30.
You've eliminated my concern. Thank you. Going to our audience, is there anyone here in support of the application today? And that, of course, would include the applicant if they wish to speak. I gotta do two things, and one is move to see you. Would you have a prepared letter that's been read? Would you like to speak to the application in addition, or maybe ask a question if there is any? Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience in opposition to the application? Seeing none, is there anyone here in the audience seeking clarification in the application? None. course, the bylaw will be brought forward in a different section of council, but we do have a prepared motion that council receive report bylaw amendment application ZBA 02-23, and that the matters of the public be heard and forwarded to the other section of council. Could we have a motion, please? Moved by John, second by Larry. All those in favor, carried. Thank you. Moving on to 8.3, being zoning bylaw amendment application 03-23, and it's vacant land on Ontario Street. Sandra, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's recommended that the proposed bylaw amendment be adopted as it appears to be in keeping with good planning principles. The notice of public meeting was circulated to the neighboring property owners on June 26, 2023. And the signs were posted on the property on June 20, 2023, in accordance with the regulations of the Planning Act. This application is in fulfillment of condition of consent to sever of B 1921 for lot addition and is seeking to zone Part 1 on 39R 14646, being the lot addition lands, to rural residential, to be in keeping with the benefiting and receiving lands. The proposal was fully reviewed, proposal for consent to sever for lot addition was fully reviewed by the Committee of Adjustment, and it appeared to be in keeping with the provincial policy statement and the township official plan for rural development. The parent property is zoned marginal agricultural. The receiving or benefiting property is zoned rural residential. The lot addition lands need to be zoned to be in keeping with the benefiting lot. A surveyor's real property report has been received. The lot addition lands and are vacant, and the dimensions of the property meet or exceed the minimum zone requirements of the rural residential zone. TransCanada Pipeline and Enbridge Pipeline bisect the parent property just south of the subject benefiting and lot addition lands. Neither company has noted any concern with the proposal. There is a letter dated September 24, 2021 from MHBC Planning, the consultants for TransCanada Pipeline. And it was received in respect to the consent application. It does note development criteria and contact information should future development occur in this area. And this has been forwarded to the property owner. It's the opinion of this department, the proposal is in keeping with the intent of the zoning bylaw. Various agency comments have been received, and there was nothing that had any objection. And again, following authoring of the planning report, a letter from the county has been received. Their summary, the Northumberland County official plan designates the subject property as rural, which permits limited residential uses. Both the provincial policy statement and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe consider lot additions within settlement areas, and the County Public Works Department and Inspection Services Division had no objection. Based on the foregoing, the county has no objection to the proposed amendment. That's all I have in respect to this application, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. Go to our audience in respect to this application. Is there anyone here in support of the application? That would include the applicant. Mike, please step to the microphone and identify yourself and location, address, and provide any comments you wish, or you might just like to answer questions if there are.
Mike Scrat, 1494 Ontario Street. I have just cleaned up the land behind my place to plant some nice trees and shrubs and add value to my property.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone here in the audience opposed to the application? Seeing none, is there anyone seeking clarification? Seeing none. Thank you, Mike. We'll move on to the regular part of this. And that we have a prepared motion. The council received report bylaw amendment application ZBA 0323 and provide comments moving forward to the consideration of council. I have a okay. Have a motion, please. Moved by John, seconded by Larry. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, we need a motion to rise from public meeting and reconvene to regular council meeting. And the motion reads that council rise from a public meeting under section 34 of the Planning Act and or section 357 of the Municipal Act and reconvene to regular meeting of council at 2:25 PM on July 18th, 2023. Mover place, moved by Bruce, seconded by Mark. Questions, comments, all those in favor? Carried, thank you. Okay, 9.1 zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw 2023-45 for 4903 County Road 45. And the motion reads that bylaw 2023-45 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 2001-58 as amended. The Township of Hamilton Land Use Control Bylaw be given first, second, and third reading and finally passed this 18th day of July of 2023. Mover place. Larry, seconder, John. Questions, comments? Bruce. Who can field that? Sandra, if you would, please.
Mr. Mayor, I will definitely defer any argument to the finance department, but I have been made to understand that MPAC has already identified this as a residential unit and then assessed it accordingly. But again, I will defer that for finance if there's any argument to that.
Thank you, Sandra. Seems very logical. Nezrat, would you like to provide comment, or is that something that's minor in nature?
Forgive me, to you, Mr. Mayor, I missed the question. If you
With the change in the zoning, will there be a change in assessment?
through you, Mr. Mayor, MPAC will be doing it. Once we get that information, we'll be able to revise the rates.
Thank you. Any further questions? We do have a motion on the floor that we need to vote on. If you would, please, all those in favor of the motion? Carried, thank you. Our staff are asking us for reasons on the motion.
That this conforms to the Hamilton Township Land Use Control Bylaw. And it also, under the bylaw 2023-46, being a bylaw to amend bylaw 2021-58 as amended. This vacant land.
Thank you, John, and
We're the wrong one. Sorry, this vacant land on Turtle Street should be done on. We're doing the other one, are we not?
Sandra, could you clarify what you need at this moment in time, please, just so that we don't get the records?
I was hoping to get some reasons as to why council was supportive of changing the commercial zone to a residential zone.
So if I might summarize and see if we're okay with it, in keeping with the official plan, correcting the zoning to the uses that have existed and no opposition present. And agencies were in support. Is that the type of information you're looking for, Sandra?
I believe so. Thank you.
Thank you. Is my fellow council members okay?
I'm sorry about that. I was reading the one for the vacant land on Turtle Street and the screen went up or down and I was reading the wrong one, so
Okay,
I apologize.
understood.
And of course, the impact of public input was negligible.
Non-existent. Thank you, Sandra. Now moving on to 9.2 as the zoning bylaw amendment 2023-46 for vacant land on Ontario Street. If you would, please. You need a motion. Could we have a motion in support? Moved by Mark to approve the. You seconded that? I'm not sure where we are. Do we need to reread this motion to our clerk?
Well,
We're gonna, for clarity, we're gonna reread the motion. The bylaw number 2023-46 being a bylaw to amend 2001-58 as amended, the Township of Hamilton Land Use Control Bylaw be given first, second, and third reading and finally passed this 18th day of July. And we have a mover over here and this moved by Mark, seconded by Larry. You're off the hook, John. You can't create any environment that I'm gonna follow in error here. Mark, same reasons as the previous application? Okay, is that sufficient, Sandra?
I believe so. That I don't expect
Okay.
any appeals.
just call the question.
Question then, all those in favor? Carried, thank you. If we've got that out of order, staff, please correct ourselves. It's been a long meeting already here. Yeah. Item 10, council meeting minutes of June 20th, 23. Motion reads that the minutes of June 20th, 23 regular council meeting be adopted. Can I have a mover? Moved by Bruce, seconded by Larry. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Give me the whole minutes. July 11th, 2023, motion reads that the minutes of the July 11th, 2023 committee of the whole meeting be approved. Do I have a mover, please? Moved by Larry, seconded by Mark. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Business arising from previous minutes, seeing none. Committee reports 12.1, motion to receive committee minutes. And the agenda items 12.2 to 12.7 on the July 18th, 2023 regular council meeting agenda be received for information. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Mark, seconded by Larry. Okay. We'll go through these one by one because there's action under accessibility, or we can just deal with 12.2 to 12.7 with,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you can deal with 12.2 separately.
okay. So, 12.2, the Accessibility Advisory Committee minutes. And there is a recommendation to council from the committee that the council and staff consider the height and location of water closet stall locks to ensure they are consistent height throughout and accessibility and accessible. And the exterior walkway to the washroom facilities be ramped to accessible building standards. And that the infant changing tables relocated to the water closet stalls for privacy reasons. Can we discuss this because our previous motion allows us to do so? Or do we need a separate motion?
Mr. Mayor, sorry about that. I stand corrected. We had a mover and a seconder for the collective motions. If you wouldn't kindly just call the question for accepting the others, and then we'll deal with the accessibility motion.
Very well. So the motion that we're voting on is to accept 12.2 to 12.7. It's been moved and seconded.
It's 12.3 to 12.7. 12.2 will be handled separately.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Thank you.
12.3 to 12.7. We got a motion. All those in favor of the motion? Carried, thank you. Going back to 12.2, of course, we just read the recommended motion, and it's dealing with washroom related and exterior walkway, as well as the infant changing table. And we need a motion.
So, Mr. Mayor, I just in reading this, Emily, could you clarify, please? There's two motions here. So do you want, are they going to be separate?
Okay. Okay, so the first motion is the recommendation that the recommendation of the Accessibility Advisory Committee work plan be approved. Is that motion one? Okay. Do we have a mover for that? Moved by Larry, seconded by John. Any questions or comments on that? Seeing none, could I have the vote on that, please? Carried, thank you. Then the second motion will be that council and staff consider the height and location of water closet stall locks to ensure they are consistent height throughout and accessible. And continuing on with that motion, in the exterior walkway to the washroom facilities is ramp. That's a same motion to accessible building standards, and that the infant changing tables relocated to the water closet stalls for privacy reasons. Okay, are we all clear on that? Okay, so that's the second motion that's just been read, dealing with the locks, exterior walkway, and the infant changing table. Could I have a mover to that, please? Moved by Larry, seconded by Mark. Any questions or comments? Everybody, I guess. John, please, you start off just because of where you're sitting.
I'll deal with all the ones, the exterior washroom ramp and the accessible stalls, I should say, and even change tables. Do we have money in our budgets for this type of renovations?
It's not known to me at this point in time. Bruce, could you provide response to that?
So at the committee, we just talked about, I think that was like, it's been proposed to be done, Parks and Rec, I've talked a couple of times about this update to the washrooms there. And so, and I'm not sure that was being done, it was just brought to our attention by one of our committee members that that's something we really should look at. And make sure that that's done to make them truly accessible. So that's why it was presented. I don't think that doing this will impact the budget, but I think it probably was already to be done in the works, from what I can understand. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Further question, John?
Just because I knew that Parks and Recreation already discussed this, but I knew Trevor was supposed to update us on when, how, and where, and what, and why at the time. So this is new to me, to us coming forward, but if it's in the budgetary items already, hopefully it'll satisfy the accessibility committee's recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Anything further than John? Coming around the room, Larry, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, where is this? What is the washroom, what facilities in the washroom? Baltimore Rec Center, outside, inside? The exterior washrooms at the Baltimore Rec Center.
Well, in the park, I believe, not
Yeah.
part of the rec center, it's the outdoor washroom for the park.
Great, thank you.
Anything further, Larry? Okay, Mark, we're going around the room. Oh,
I have a few questions on this one. One is, I mean, it's asked us to consider it. It doesn't say to do it or finish it, or are we doing it now? Are we doing it next year? Or is it going to budget? Or I'm not 100% sure where it's going. So it's asking us, and even in our recommendation back, I mean, so should we change? Does that wording need to be changed? Or are we going to get a staff report to come back to say that it's how we're doing it and when we're doing it? Because it's just saying to consider at this point.
does staff want to field that, or do we think we have an answer to that through Larry?
Through you, Chair, I can defer to Deputy Mayor Williamson. Well, I'll clarify, sorry, I'll just clarify through the Mayor Chip. It is the budget for the Baltimore Park washroom renovations that are underway. It's $50,000 been approved by council already. The project has gone through its planning. It's expected to be implemented this summer. And I've confirmed with Trevor that we should be fine for the accessibility recommendations to make those changes. So they believe they can accommodate it within the budget. However, if there are any difficulties identified, we'd have Trevor report back through the process if there's a problem implementing one of those 3 recommendations for the ramp, for the locks, and for the change tables.
So back to my question then, why are we considering it if it's already been approved? Do we just receive this for information?
Through Mayor Chip, I believe it would have been part of the committee's mandate or priority to make sure these kinds of issues are considered, but I know that our manager, Parks and Rec, Trevor Clapperton, is very familiar with some of the accessibility issues, and he would have included that in there, but I'm sure they're flagging it to make sure it's brought forward so the public's aware that we're designing that including that in the washing facilities in the present redesign and reconstruction or renovation, sorry.
So again, for our motion, then, do we need to just receive this, or do we need to, it says to consider, and I mean, it's already been considered, it's been approved and it's going forward. So do we need to change this recommendation or this motion a bit to?
Would it be appropriate to receive this recommendation and to forward it to the appropriate
Staff to,
Parks and Rec
staff to complete.
staff for consideration?
Through your Mayor Chip, I think that would be very helpful. And again, if there are any difficulties identified, we could still report back, but then that'll give us the flexibility to, for example, are the change tables relocated to a water closet stalls, or is there screening that's provided? So we'll be able to adjust with that recommendation that we receive it and it's forwarded for consideration.
Let's just see if there's any other questions, and then maybe we can come to our clerk for a little clarity here on this one. Is there any other questions from council members? Daphne, I could turn to you, please, and help us through
Thanks.
this process.
Thank you, your worship. So I was just thinking, in listening to our CAO and understanding that it would be forwarded to staff, I think the intent of the committee is to have its recommendation considered by council. I think they're seeking direction from council to direct staff to consider the height and location. And then if it weren't something they could do, they could report back. So it sounds as though, based on what you've said, that the committee is already received and council has already endorsed the project and the spending. But if there were areas that were not consistent with the height and accessibility guidelines, that they wouldn't be able to complete that. So I think the intent of the committee is to do their best to try to bring it to the accessible standards. So by council directing staff to consider the height and location of the water closets, stall locks to ensure they're consistent, then they would do their very best in doing that. If we were to change that word.
We don't need to change the motion that we've already created here.
It's going to be an and, it directs staff rather than an and staff.
Okay,
Yeah, because I think we want to direct staff. I mean, we don't want to, we want this to happen. So I mean, we don't want it.
okay. I think our group is okay with that. We just need a little direction from you of what do we need to do with what we have on the motion? And how do we adjust it?
So
Technically correct.
technically we have a mover and a seconder for the motion as it stands. If we could get the mover and the seconder to strike the word and change it to directs, then we can just move forward.
Okay,
Vote on that and then vote on the amended motion.
well, wow. Okay, I was doing well understanding until you got to that. Sorry.
You have a motion on the table to amend with the striking of and inserts direct. So if we could have a call of question, and then you'll vote again on the amended motion.
Okay, so I'm going to call a question on the motion that's on the floor.
To amend.
Everybody, all in favor? Okay. And now we need to have a subsequent motion
That's right.
that we change the word and to direct.
It's the amended motion. Yes, I will take care of the rest.
Okay, so there's a new amended motion, and I think we're all clear, although Daphne's gonna have to make it on paper clear. That it's gonna say that council direct staff instead of and staff.
Yeah.
Could we have a mover for that, please? Move by there, seconded by Bruce. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Did we get through that? Okay. we're good to move on? Okay, item 12.3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are done. It's 2:45 if I'm reading right. Could we take a very short break? Which we have done to our roads department manager many times. So I'm assuming it's okay. Back here. 2:50 or before. Emily, are we good? Okay, we're back at 2:51. Thank you, everyone, and we do have a council member that will be returning, but we still have quorum and we have Clerk's Department representation. We're under item 13, Public Works and Infrastructure. Item 13.1, parking restriction changes. Lucas, would you like to speak to it?
Good afternoon, Mayor Jib and Council. Wrote this report for additional parking restrictions in Harwood area. So all the information is presented in front of you. If you have any further questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you, Lucas. Do we have any questions of staff? Okay, I'll read the prepared motion. The council receives report Public Works and Infrastructure 2023-07 regarding parking restriction changes for information, and the council approves the amendments to bylaw 2017-13, Schedule A, location and description of fire routes, Schedule C, no parking at any time restrictions, and that the clerk be directed to bring forward the amending bylaw. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Larry, seconded by Mark. Any questions or comments? All those in favor, carried. Thank you. Moving on, again with Public Works and Infrastructure, to 13.2 on our agenda regarding Public Works equipment hours and location. And I must admit, I've asked and did receive a hard copy of this. I think I think we should be looking at modifications there and simplifications and making it a little more concise and easier as we move forward with maintaining the integrity of the information request. So I'll go to the motion, get it on the floor. Prepared motion that council receives report Public Works and Infrastructure 2023-08, Public Works equipment hours report and location for information. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by John, seconded by Bruce. Questions, comments? Yes, John, please.
Yes, thanks for the report, Lucas. I appreciate that. I'm struggling with the fact about this sheet of paper that you added onto there. I think it's your what do they call it? It's a Q1 locations, a Q2 locations, etc. I guess it's a data sheet you put out of some sort.
So no, it would be actually just Q1, be Q1, Q2. So during the motion that was passed back in March during, I think, council meeting, I didn't have any information for Q1.
No, okay.
So Q2 would be April, May, June.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, good. Thank you. When I read the report, I'm having difficulty understanding in some of these aspects. You put down for I'll use the roadside multi-purpose power unit. And I think also back in the Champion Grader, you've got down there that some hours are 5, but others are 10 hours. Is that the use of the machine for 10 hours, or is that just when the machine was available?
No, so that would be, those 10 hours would be a 10-hour working day. So if that machine was working on Bethel Grove Road, for example, for May 17th, that would be a 10-hour day. Those hours don't represent the hour meter on the machine, because there would be so many more additional notes taken for the machine. Sometimes there's inconsistencies with hour meters. So those hours are just meaning a full work day, because we work 10-hour days. We just assume that machine is out there for a 10-hour work day, a full day.
Okay. With all due respect, I think the motion was the hours of operated per day, was operated per day, not on site or at the wherever. I'm talking about when it was on let's say Bethel Grove Road. You got transportation from here to there. You've got coffee breaks, you've got lunch breaks out of your 10-hour day. So I'm estimating 8 hours, 7 hours, maybe at the most. And I think that's what should be reflected here, because when the public view that and they say, well, geez, out there for 10 hours, you must be working a 12-hour day. It reflects that it's not the actual true figures that we should be having. And the other point I want to make as well, and various locations, I don't understand that.
So through that process, especially with the mower or the new machine, we'll say, it will cover multiple roads. Now with that specific machine, we have other means of tracking where the location is. But like I said, sometimes the operator forgets to write down in the journal entry where he was. So I just left it as general, as best information I had at that time. So.
Okay, I'm just kind of wondering if maybe we could kind of clean that up a bit, maybe, if you could. It'd help in moving forward.
Anything further, John?
No, thank you. That's good.
Other comments or questions? I have one in, I mean, it's conversation for consideration, I guess, from my point of view. It would seem to me that this is a very onerous task to be done. And I wonder if we could simplify it. Yes, Lucas, I hear you that hour meters from one machine to the next do vary. But at the same time, they give us that accuracy on that particular machine. And I'm sort of heading towards that in my mindset, that might be easier. But it wouldn't be easier if it was done on a daily basis. It would be much worse if it were done on a daily basis. I'm questioning whether we could or should be benefited by the amount of hours in the quarterly, which is the quarterly report that's intended in this portion of the motion. And you know, we know the brushing machine's going to be out brushing. And it's going to say various locations. Yes, I get that. But if we had a monthly or a quarterly saying we put 160 hours on the brusher and we got the northwest corner and the northeast corner of the township done, would that be as beneficial or more so? And would it be less onerous on you, Lucas, or whoever's doing this with you? And I guess I'm at the point where I want to turn to you, Lucas, and say, I think you have the intent of what the motion is. And could you provide an overview, not necessarily today, but could you provide an overview of what would be more beneficial from your time perspective, from the understanding perspective that we want to see that the new brusher, because we've gone through that just recently, that we're getting 100 hours or 200 hours a quarter on it, sort of thing. So I throw that out for conversation at this point in time from where I sit. I don't get a lot of benefit from shift of 10 hours in various locations on the 17 days it was out. I don't get a lot from that, but yet it's a lot of time for you to do that. So
Yeah, so
I guess I'm looking to you going, you know,
so Mayor Jib, yeah, if there was ways to summarize it, obviously through the motion at council meeting, it asks for day-to-day operations or those details. Obviously, there is a lot of work energy in this because obviously we're tracking it every day. Sometimes it's not even on here that if we're using the loader to load coal patch, it might only run for 20 minutes, half hour. Do we track it? Sometimes we do. Other times one of those items may get forgotten. Do we lend out the culvert trailer or the pull trailer to a fellow local municipality to borrow it to get pipe from Armtech Peterborough? So this report is the best we can do. Obviously, if we can summarize it based on monthly equipment usage based on hour meters and give you an idea on the locations where they were, yes, that would be very helpful. Some of the newer equipment does have GPS in them. So with that type of items in it, that I can run a very high level report or very detailed report to show where that GPS or where that equipment was. Other equipment just doesn't have it. And there's also a cost to it. So if we can summarize it based on monthly, based on hours,
as well as a general idea where it was, then obviously, yeah, it would help this and it would clean this report up. So it's not 9 or 10 pages on Excel documents. So, I mean, initial motion was kind of to the day-to-day, but obviously I'm here to make it a lot easier as well. So it's not as much work on myself for the administration side of it.
I mean, there's any number of examples here that the Lieber excavator compacted the garbage bin for an hour. That's such fine tuning that it's really not what I'm thinking of value as we move forward with your time and our budget information. I guess sitting here, I can't really make a motion that I know of. And if I do want to do that, there's quite a procedure. What I'd like to do is kind of come back to my fellow council members and say, would any of you consider a motion that we provide Lucas some opportunity to still provide us some information, but in a somewhat different method here, and see where we go with that? Or what would council like to do? Larry, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Lucas, I guess where this is driving from is that we paid so much money for this new multi-use cutter that I think you said that because of GPS, you could actually track where it is, when it is, and all that kind of stuff. But I think maybe if we had a schedule of a routine that this product or this vehicle was to do on a circle basis, in other words, cover off so many roads instead of, all of a sudden somebody calls in and we've got a real serious problem down here that you got to rush down to do that. I think the idea was to demonstrate to the public that this machine is being used and it's in various locations throughout the day. The other thing that bothers me as a counselor is that we get criticized about the roads department of where they are and they haven't done this and they haven't done that. By actually demonstrating how many different roads, this is phenomenal for me because I look and I said, oh my God, look how much work we've done. I mean, this is, that you've been on Bethel, you've been on Williamson, you've been on Jib, this is just for the one machine. But for the other machines, I think it's to hire the more efficient machines, like the graders and the backhoes and stuff like that, that we get to see where that machine's been or, how many roads we've been working on is a better indicator for me. How many hours, I'm not sure I see that, but I don't know if I've made sense of this, but I just think it's just to demonstrate to the public that our roads department is out there working and, and that we are efficiently and effectively working within the community to address the issues that people have. That's all I've got to say. Thanks.
I'm going to take a liberty here and I'm going to look at you, John. John, it's not my intentions. I have in front of me that you made the original motion. So I want to come back to you. I don't want to override what that motion that you created back in March, I think it was, and change a whole lot. So John, please provide comment and some clarity for us all, if you could.
Yes, thank you. And I thank Larry for his comments there as well. I think what is I'm hearing from Lucas is the fact that it is erroneous and it is taking a lot of time and effort to bring this forward. So let's go back in and revamp or reword that motion to basically cut back on some of the equipment. I'd like to see I make a motion that we only have report to Council quarterly the number of hours operated per day and location of equipment utilized, the champion grader. Oh, sorry.
Got your intention, but we do have a motion on the floor,
Yep.
which is to receive the report.
Okay.
And I told. At that meeting, at that second. Now the question will be already have in front. of us, but I gotta change that. Okay. So I can call the vote to receive the report. Karen, thank you. John, you need help with the report. Wish to reflect on a previous. Sorry, please. Continue.
That's right. I'd just like to amend that motion and bring forward a lesser list of equipment that could be brought forward for the hours of operation per day and location and equipment utilized. And just put it down to the champion grader, the roadside multi-purpose grass vegetation unit, Levere excavator brushing, and Levere excavator ditching.
Okay, I was writing slow, John. You
Oh, sorry.
repeat that. We got champion grader.
Roadside multi-purpose grass vegetation power unit.
Yeah.
Levere excavator brushing and Levere excavator ditching.
Okay.
And that hopefully that will help Lucas in his efforts.
Just a point of clarity before we move forward with that. We're simplifying the number of units. Are we simplifying the number of hours of per day type information? Are we moving that to a weekly or monthly documentation of information based on the hours on the machine?
Sorry, we can do that by the quarterly again. We've already got the one quarterly one in July. We have one in October of 2023 and January 2024.
The components within the request
Yes,
won't be on a per day basis. It will be on a larger period of time.
monthly, on a monthly basis if you like.
Okay,
That's fair.
seem to be working on this.
Yeah.
Moving documents.
Yeah.
So you're up to that location.
Is
You're talking location.
well, location be difficult, would it not? Lucas, I'm asking Lucas that question. Is the through your worship, it would be,
I mean, the excavators are typically on a road per day, right? We're not moving them, floating them around, so
Yeah.
we'll put the locations as best we can, but obviously. We'll put it at a little bit high level that if we're over there at the. Garbage can squishing it, we won't put that in there.
would you consider like putting in like in a block, like you were at let's say Harwood area, so you block in a whole Harwood area that you have done all the roads in Harwood, you've done all the roads in Gore's Landing, you've done all the roads in just block it in certain areas.
Yeah, leave it with me. Obviously, it's a working document. See what I can
Yeah.
kind of add if there's any aerial imagery that we could add for mapping, so it's a lot easier. So
Yeah.
leave it
It'd
with
be
me.
a lot
and
easier for you, yeah.
See what we can do.
Just for the grass cutter, probably be the one I'd be looking at the most. I think that's where the public is really concerned. Yeah.
So with that specific mower, the GPS wasn't in there for the full Q2. So I didn't want to give you kind of misleading information, but for Q3, we can do a map based on right from say July 1st right up to.
Great.
And then I'll show you the whole entire township with lines on it. So.
Good. Yeah, but
That's
and
good.
I appreciate that because I know that this is quite a task and I know the public are very concerned about sight lines and their ditches and whatever, and you're doing a fantastic job so far, but just the public are I don't know what it is. They're just taking a different turn, but that's how it is. Well, thank you.
Okay, John, I think we all have the intent and it's critical that Lucas and Arthur and Daphne have the intent, and I think we do. I think they do. So are you making that a motion? Okay. And Mark's going to second that. Is there any question or comments on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Jib. Through you, Mayor Jib. I think our battery gave out. Just to clarify, one or two comments, and that is, we did deliver the report as requested from the last resolution. Appreciate the input on the comments. Help us improve that reporting, give a sense that how equipment is being used, and there's the more limited number of pieces of equipment, where it's being used, and some of the results. So we'll look at that reporting. We'll bring some of that information back to in the next quarter. I think we'll be able to do a good job, but I do want to assure council and the public that our staff are working hard at keeping the equipment out, doing the work in the community. And that this data will sort of help to show where some of those results are actually being, making a difference in the community every day. And I think part of that will also, we're looking at using some of those tools. I talked to Lucas earlier in the month, whether we post it live, kind of like the map your file is live or not. We're looking at the different options, and we'll come back with an updated report that is easier to prepare, but understandable to council and the results.
Thank you, Arthur. You've summarized all our comments quite nicely. Thank you, Lucas. Item 14, our agenda is Recs and Facilities. We have nothing. Moving on to 15, 15.1, our consent merger agreement. It is recommended that Council of the Corporation Township of Hamilton acts as follows. The council receives report PNG 09-2023 consent merger agreement, being a severance agreement for information, and that the mayor and clerk be directed to sign the consent merger agreement and return it to the applicant, Del Crespin, for registration on title and fulfillment of the condition of consent. We do have staff here if we have questions. Yes, Larry? Motion to approve? Seconder? Mark? Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 15.2, capital closed projects. Report number 2023-16 is recommended to Council of Corporation Township of Hamilton acts as follows. The council receives report 2023-16, being the 2022 capital closed budget for information. I have a mover, please. Moved by Larry, seconded by Bruce. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 15.3. Motion reads the council receives report 2023-17, being the 2022 reserve and reserve funds balances for information. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Bruce, second by John. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 15.4. Report 2023-18, reporting requirement under regulation 284-09. Prepared motion that council receives report 2023-18. Reporting requirement under regulation 284/09 for information. I have a mover, please. Moved by Mark, second by John. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 15.5, development charge reserve funds. Prepared motion that council receives report 2023-19, being the 2022 development charge reserve funds for information. Mover, please. Bruce, seconder, John. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 15.6. Policy to govern the sale and disposition of surplus municipal lands. Motion is the council receives report CD 2023-09. Policy to govern the sale and disposition of surplus municipal lands for information, and that bylaw 2023-43 being a bylaw to establish policies and procedures to govern the sale of surplus municipal lands be brought forward for consideration. Moved by John, seconded by Larry. Any questions or comments? Question, John.
Sure, your worship. I know the deputy did this report. Has there been any individuals coming forward that would like to purchase municipal land such as road allowances and right of ways and whatever else we can consider?
Through you, Mayor Jib, the Chief Administrative Officer is aware of all sales or interest in purchasing municipal land. So I understand there are a couple of parcels of municipally owned land that may come forward to council to be declared surplus. Any road allowances that would fit within the policy are brought forward to council for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mark?
If someone does come forward with wanting to purchase property and so forth. I'm sorry, I read this earlier today and I'm gonna ask the question. Is there, like, we don't want the cost coming to the municipality. Is there something in here to say that all costs will go to the purchaser?
Through you, Mayor Jib, yes, Councillor Levshin, it will all be borne to the, should that be the recommendation of council, to the proponent or the interested party. So the current, the policy is currently written to give all discretion to municipal council. So the chief administrator, as administrative officer, and I would come to council with a recommendation, and then in closed session to discuss the sale or potential disposition of land, and then council could come up with those conditions. So it doesn't strictly say that at all times, all costs are borne by the applicant. That would be something that council would consider when upon our recommendation.
I found this section to be a long read and a difficult read, to be honest with you, in relationship to my understanding. So I don't have any questions other than the fact that it's lengthy. And staff report is very involved, and I thank you for that. And to gather my thoughts, we do have a motion on the floor. And we need to vote on that in support, please. All those in favor, carried, thank you. 15.7, amendment to animal control bylaw for DocuPed and Northumberland Humane Society agreement. Motion reads that council receives report CD 2023-10, amendment to animal control bylaw for DocuPet and Northumberland Humane Society agreement for information, and that bylaws 2023-41 and 2023-42 to amend the animal control bylaw and to appoint Jack McQuaid as animal control officer be brought forward for consideration. Moved by Larry, seconded by John. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 16.1 under emergency services, noise bylaw exemption request. The council receives report BLW 2023-05, noise bylaw exemption request for information. And then that council approves the request for the exemption. Of noise bylaw 2014-36 to permit amplified music for a birthday party celebration, August 26, 2023 until 9 p.m. Moved by Larry, seconded by Mark. Can anybody tell me where this actually is? I couldn't find it in the information, and it doesn't have to be now. Well, I never got my eyes on that, and it's closer to home than I realized. But it's 9 o'clock. It won't affect me. True enough. Okay, it's been moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. 16.2, sign bylaw exemption request. Prepared motion, the council approves the request from Margaret McGilvery for the exemption of sign bylaw number 2020-62 to permit signs in Northumberland Hills Studio Tour from August 31st to September 12th, 2023. Can I have a mover, please? Thanks, Larry. Seconder, John. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Bylaws. Bylaw 2023-41. It is recommended Council Corporation Township of Hamilton acts as follows. The bylaw 2023-41 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 2022-43 animal control bylaw be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed this 18th day of July. Mover, please. Moved by John, seconded by Bruce. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 18.2, motion reads that bylaw 2023-42 being a bylaw to appoint Jack McQuaid as animal control officer be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed this 18th day of July 2023. Mover, please. Mark. Seconder, Larry. Questions, comments? All those in favor? Carried, thank you. 18.3, bylaw regarding surplus land policy. Motion reads that bylaw 2023-43, being a bylaw for the sale of surplus land, be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed this 18th day of July 2023. Moved by Larry, seconded by Bruce. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried, thank you. 18.4, parking bylaw. Motion reads that bylaw 2023-44, being a bylaw to amend bylaw 2017-13, being a parking bylaw, be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed this 18th day of July. Mover, please. Mark, seconder, Bruce. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Moving on past notice of motions, media questions, closed session, reporting on the closed session, down to 24, being 24.1. Motion is our confirmatory bylaw, the bylaw 2023-47, being a bylaw to adapt the proceedings of council meeting held on the 18th day of July 2023, and to authorize its execution be given first, second, and third, and finally passed on this 18th day of July 23. Motion, please, John. Larry, questions, comments? All those in favor? Carried. Next motion, that the regular council meeting held on July 18th, 2023 be adjourned at 3:23 p.m. Mover, Mark. Seconder. Larry. Any comments or questions?